All right, it looks like we're going to get started here. So good morning, afternoon to everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Bring Your Own Automation and Integrated Approach to Managing Your Network. Quick introduction, my name is Chris Wade. I'm the CTO with Itential, and we also have joining with us today Alex Degetz, one of our product managers who focuses on Automation Gateway and some of the stuff we're going to be demonstrating. So before we get started, everybody on the call is muted. We'll reserve answering questions until the end. We do have that question and answer section. I would really appreciate some questions if you wouldn't mind putting some in there during the webinar. And if we can't get all the questions today, that's happened before, we'll answer your questions via email after the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. So from an Itential standpoint, we're going to talk a lot today about Automation Gateway, one of our portfolio items, and how we're moving from API enabling scripts. But just for some context, from an Itential perspective, we believe very strongly in the evolution of automation, and we're really coming from a human-centric worldview as it pertains to managing the network and moving to a machine-centric world. So when we describe kind of a human-centric world, it's very CLI-centric. A lot of people complain about the quality of the network data. Usually the way we think about that is the quality of the network data is as good as it is because we had humans involved. So we were able to make up for that gap by having human-centric processes. And integrating systems was quite complex. So the REST-based interface and API ecosystem that we have today was not in place. And we had very human-centric processes, ones built around BPM and a lot of human-centric views of the world. So the combination of CLI plus low quality of data because humans were augmenting it, plus high IT systems tax, and these human-centric processes kind of got us to where we are today, which is the very human heavy view of managing our network infrastructure. And I think everybody on today's call are more forward-looking. So we're viewing, moving towards this machine-centric view of the world, which is first and foremost programmable. So moving from that CLI world into programmability, and then looking at data as highly decentralized and very, very much a federated view of the world. We're not going to copy stale data into a centralized view. We're going to federate it from where it is. And then model-driven, RPA is kind of busted on the scene as far as automating very human-centric processes, but augmenting that with model-driven behavior, which has been kind of core to modernizing a machine-centric view of network infrastructure. And then that kind of open API ecosystem I spoke about. So moving from a view where integrating systems is very heavy and very time-consuming and very expensive to a view where open APIs kind of drive the interaction of systems in an easy-to-use way. And obviously moving towards a more connected and cloud-centric view of network services. So that's kind of the backdrop for some of the stuff we'll talk to today. So then I'm reminded from my analyst friends that although we talk about a lot of automation of the network, we still have a predominant mix of very ad hoc and very CLI-centric views being enacted in the world. So we talk a lot about this modern ecosystem, but I think it's important to remind ourselves that if we look at some of these metrics from EMA and Gartner around 60% of enterprises still utilize manual processes. And most network automation teams are not seeing the full value of their investments this year. So although we're going to talk a lot about automating the network, we really have to ground ourselves in the reality that there's a lot of CLI and script-based activities going on in the world, and we have to figure out how to complement these two worlds and make sure we move in the right direction. So we call this a misnomer. A lot of vendors and a lot of customers we speak with talk about, their existing world where they have scripts, and there's a lot of intellectual property in these scripts. And usually when I talk to customers, they don't say that they think their scripts are the best. They just say that's what we've had to do in the CLI-centric world we had. And we spent a lot of time building intellectual property. Those scripts upgrade software, those scripts change network configuration, those scripts do all sorts of things that make our businesses go by day to day. And then there's a lot of awesome orchestrators and controllers and modern network capabilities that say, hey, if you build everything in my system, the world's going to be a better place. And a lot of customers are kind of at this fork in the road where they have to decide what they want to do. And from our perspective, and what we're going to talk about today, is that we very much believe in the adoption of controllers and orchestrators. We think it's the future of how you manage your network, but we don't think you necessarily have to make that decision where you're at a fork in the road and you feel like you have to start over or take 2 steps back to take 1 step forward. So we're going to kind of talk about how we can take some of your existing technology and some of your existing intellectual capital and make sure that we can move you forward on your automation journey while modernizing your infrastructure. So if we look at a journey, and those that have joined previous webinars, this visual will look fairly standard for Itential, but the blue line below really represents your existing network, which is predominantly a physical infrastructure. And over the last couple of years, a lot of people have really said, do I continue with my scripts or do I start adopting DevOps concepts and do I start modeling my CLI? And we believe that some of the manual and scripts have a cap on how much advantage they have in a programmable infrastructure. And most customers we speak to today are modernizing their existing plant and their existing physical infrastructure while adopting some new technologies. So whether it's in your data center with some overlay, or whether it's in your WAN with some software-defined WAN concepts, those platforms come more programmable out of the box. And ultimately, the question is, how do I take my existing investment in scripts? How do I modernize those with some DevOps concepts? And how do I adopt these new network modern techniques? And how do I have a comprehensive automation strategy, which kind of is an above all of the above type of concept, instead of feeling like you have to throw away and start over with any of those concepts? So this value of an integrated approach, we speak a lot about using the right tool for the right job. Itential's role in an automation ecosystem is really to focus on some of the end-to-end concepts. And we fully expect, and we're going to talk about multi-domain later, that there's specific techniques that are applicable to the types of automation. So whether you're automating DNS or middle boxes with load balancers in the data center, or whether you're automating SD-WAN at the edge or optical or wireless, we want you to use the right tool for the right job. And that's why kind of integration with that ecosystem is so important. We definitely want to promote innovation without the rip and replace methodology. We want you to swap out those legacy techniques at the most appropriate time and not feel like you have to start over. And ultimately talking about enabling more groups to participate in network automation. So a lot of the new techniques require people to learn modeling and Yang and Tosca and API ecosystems. And a lot of network engineers have been learning Python and scripts and adopting DevOps concepts. So the question is, how do we get the largest group of people to participate in network automation, and having this integrated approach with the right tool for the right job, with the largest amount of participation, leveraging the assets that you already have, we think makes the most sense to move forward. So with that, we're going to get into the specific product type of demonstration. So in this concept, we're going to talk about the Itential Automation Gateway, which was released as part of our 2019.2 release. So there's 2 demonstrations today. The first one's going to be focused on Automation Gateway, which is an independent product. This Automation Gateway leverages your scripts, kind of what we're talking about today. For execution, it does a discovery of the scripts within that local ecosystem, and it really allows you to decorate them and expose them through an API so that you can execute them remotely. Historically, if I had my scripts on my Unix box in the Chris Wade directory, I would only have to be concerned with myself having access to that and running that. If we want to talk about the largest amount of participation, I need to figure out ways of how to leverage that script to enable other people to have access to executing that, but at the same time put the rigor and control to make sure that they have the right permissions, they know what they're doing with it, and it's integrated in the rest of my systems. So for the purpose of this first demo, we're going to focus on how to do a live demo of onboarding a script and executing it through the API. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Chris. So this is our automation gateway, which we have published in 2019.2. And what we see here, we see our device inventory. We see on the left-hand side modules, playbooks, and roles. These are things we have discovered from Ansible and make them API enabled. But we're going to focus in this session, we're going to focus on scripts. And so these are just some scripts that we have discovered on that box. You see here some C scripts, some Shell, some Python, some Perl. In this demo, I'll focus on Python scripts, and we see this get interface info script that could be leveraged as it is like in any of your networks. For now, it's not what we call enhanced, so it doesn't have one of these blue triangles yet. What that means is we just have discovered that we have an argument list, and out of the box we have API enabled the script so that you can use it through Postman, remotely executable, however you want to integrate it. Just to quickly show that we can actually do this, we have an awesome Swagger documentation here in which you can actually execute our APIs. And so I'm going to go to this execute scripts, and I'm going to use my cheat sheet and copy something we want to do on this device. This is a real device. We're hitting a Cisco CSR 1KV device. And as the argument list, I'm basically pasting in an interface name, which is loopback 105, and we're just getting information about this interface. Now, the only thing that I need left to do is I need to type in my interface name, get interface info, Python, and hit execute. And what it does in the background, it curls that script, it runs that script, and we see we got a success response, and we see this interface is actually available, loopback 105. This is the IP address, this is the description. It doesn't look nice. We'll catch that later in our workflow to see how we can represent the data better. But for now, we've just executed a script that you previously had on your Unix box. We now have made it available through an API call. To make this even better and to make it more user-friendly, what we can do is we can enhance that script. So right now, we just have this argument list of an arbitrary number of things I can put in. What I actually want to put in is an interface name of a type string. And I can add a description, which is basically interface to get information from. And it's not an array anymore, so I'm going to remove these items. We're going to remove the comma. And the second parameter here, script argument order, is just basically if I have multiple arguments, what is the order that I want to post them into. In this case, we only have one, so it doesn't really matter. But if I save this, we see that now my script is enhanced. That means I've defined the parameters. It is available now to be consumed by our IAP solution, our IAP workflows. And I'm just going to show you to run it again now with the interface name as a parameter. And that really helps when we make our personal scripts available for others to run. We need some description, we need some better documentation on what each parameter does. So this helps out as well. And so here we again paste interface name loopback 105. I leave the host empty because that script is run on my on the machine where Automation Gateway lives on that server. I could also do remote execution of those scripts. I'll type in the name of the script again, get interface info. And we see now we've gotten the same response, a success response, see the same interface, but now with a script that was decorated. Of course, that was a very simple example in decoration. In our second demo, we'll see a little bit more of a complex script, which is to create an interface, and there we'll pass in interface name, description, IP address, and a net mask. And if you want to look, it's basically JSON schema that we use here, very straightforward when you want to decorate your own scripts or enhance your own scripts. So that was the automation gateway part. In the second demo, we'll look into how to integrate that with our IAP solution. But for now, I'll give it back to Chris.
Awesome. And before I get back into the slides, the one thing I wanted to highlight on the automation gateway, given that it has its own API interface, we're going to show in the second demo how it can be complemented with IAP and the workflow capabilities to build an end-to-end integration. But you can have as many instances of these in your implementation as you want, and those APIs are available to anybody in the ecosystem. So we wanted to just make sure in that first demonstration we highlighted that We're going to show an integrated approach later, but standalone, you can use it for any sort of execution of both those scripts as well as the rest of the ecosystem that's being added to Automation Gateway. So with that, we'll talk a little bit more about how we can take that capability and that functionality and integrate it into kind of a larger view of an end-to-end automation. So I alluded to this earlier, but from an automation standpoint, these capabilities can be exposed to multiple domains. So whether these scripts or whether these DevOps platforms or whether your controllers and orchestrators, you're going to have specific techniques for each of these domains. And as we get into looking at the end-to-end view, I want to take into consideration applying these types of techniques to each of these domains. And we can come up with specific use cases in the next one. So from an integrated strategy perspective, back to the automation journey that I went through before the first demo, it's really about how do I take my existing capabilities because the landscape of automation techniques continues to grow. I think when we would have spoke 3 or 4 years ago, we were thinking about having centralized controller and centralized orchestration. And what we've seen in the marketplace is kind of proliferation of these capabilities. So we talk a lot about taking on DevOps concepts, looking at continuous integration as a way of managing your network and augmenting that with network orchestration and cloud orchestration techniques. And the data structures that underpin those are really being kind of standardized around YAML, Yang, and Tosca. But we look at the execution of these scripts and the data structures that are behind them in a similar manner, and we're trying to standardize those northbound. So what Alex was just showing is taking what is pretty much a random set of arguments for a script, decorating those with a specific set of JSON schema, and then the northbound of those scripts start to look pretty similar to the northbound interfaces we get from pretty robust platforms, so that you can decide when it's most appropriate for your business and most appropriate for your network automation journey to migrate those scripts to more modern techniques. But we still want to ground ourselves in the fact that the target data and the target API ecosystem still stands around these 4 pillars, both from a capability standpoint and the data structures that underpin them. So with the second demo, we took a snapshot here and we put these logos on here so we can highlight the fact that it is integrating a variety of platforms. So we're going to take the execution and modification of that script that did a lookup on a loopback interface, and we're going to integrate it with some inventory concepts with Netbox. We're going to integrate it with collecting data from the network using an Ansible module. We're going to convert that through a text FSM module, which converts network CLI into models. And we're ultimately going to put it into Bitbucket to show how we can integrate both scripts and some traditional techniques, preparing you for a world that views CI/CD and continuous integration of the network as the primary method. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Alex for the second demonstration.
Thank you, Chris. So let's look a little bit closer on this workflow that we just saw in this in the screenshot. So what we want to do in this workflow, we want to create an interface, and which is basically at the core of it, we just call this create interface script that we already have in our automation gateway. But as you know, when you've ever run a script, you have to manually grab data from everywhere. You need to verify that it was successful. You need to verify if that interface already exists on that device. These are all steps that you had to do manually before, and these are all reflected at in some part of this workflow here. So let's start at the right side. We're going to show users a form. I'll get to that later, to put in some information that we need about that interface. And with that, we use Ansible, an iOS command, to check the current device configuration to see if that interface that we want to create already exists. To do that, we use text FSM as well to nicely parse and operationalize the output. I mean, whoever has run the show running config output, that's just like a large string. It's not very easy to look at and to make programmatic decisions on. So TextFSM really helps us do that. I'll show that later. And then we make the first decision in our workflow to say like, hey, does this interface already exist? If not, we go our happy path, the green path, and go on and create it. If it doesn't exist, we will see, we will ask the user what we should do. Should we redeploy? Should we delete what's currently there and redeploy it with our new interface and start over with that workflow? Or should we just end it? In our happy path, if the interface was not found so far on the device, we'll go to Netbox, and I'll show that here. We have reserved an IP address from Netbox that we want to grab for this interface. This is what that task does, and then we just do some. We split the IP address, do some preparation, and then we actually run the create interface script. Do some post check with Ansible after we run it to see to be able to show a diff between the config when it was not there and the config that we've added now. And then we'll give you again this blue task. These are manual tasks. We'll give you again the opportunity to choose: do I want to keep this or do I want to revert this change? And at the end, if I want to keep it, we'll update Netbox because that IP address is no longer available. We're using it now, and we have also added a quick Bitbucket integration to take the current device backup before we make the change and after the change and push that to Bitbucket. So I will also show a commit into Bitbucket to see that we've changed the device configuration. Okay, so that is the workflow itself. The way I build these workflows is very straightforward. We have an automatic discovery of anything that, for example, Automation Gateway offers us. So if I search for NetMiko here, I see the 3 NetMiko scripts that I've also seen on Automation Gateway. The same is true for other tasks, like if we want to use like a local backup for our configuration manager, we could just like add a backup device task to a workflow and connect it wherever we want. But we already have the Bitbucket backup, so I'm not going to do this now. So let's go to the next step. Let's actually run this workflow. And there we have a lot of powerful features that we've added around running workflows, and they're all in an app we call Automation Catalog, which is basically our self-service portal to run the automations that we offer in our platform. And what we see here, I selected that workflow, interface create, and I selected a form, and we see that on the right side here. This is where I can actually select which device do I run to run this update on. What is the name of the interface that I want to create? What is the description of the interface? So I can predefine those, and the reason why I can predefine those is I can, one, run this script manually. This is what we will do in this demo, but I can also schedule a run to say like, hey, this should actually run maybe on Saturday night on a maintenance window, for example. We could even repeat this operation that we have like reoccurring scheduled runs. But as I said, for now, I'm going to run it manually. And another part that I want to focus on is the access control. We've talked a lot about access control. I have my own scripts. I only have access rights to run those. So what happens if I just publish them? Can now anyone run my scripts? That's not the case. We have the ability to restrict who can even see or change this automation. And this is here with our groups pop-up on the top here. So basically my user is in the Promon admin group. So this is why it's highlighted in white here. And I could just say, I want to add read-only right for the operations group, for example. And these are groups that we, in this case, we have connected to LDAP. So these are LDAP groups that we're using. So whatever access rights you had on LDAP for your scripts, for example, we could just ingest those and make them available here as well. Okay, so that's Automation Catalog. So now I'm going to actually run this automation. I'll leave the core ATL2 device. It's the device I want to run it on. And let's say we'll create a loopback interface 103. And we'll actually use the description 103 as well, so that we see something has changed. And again, we're hitting the same CSR 1K device from our previous demo. So let's actually run this workflow. And if we go to our job, we can visualize it, and now we can actually see it going through the steps. So now we're talking to Ansible, getting the configuration of that device, and run the text.sm template. We've evaluated if that interface is already on the device or not. It was not on the device, so we already made the call to Netbox, and we're already at the stage now where we create this interface on our device. We do the post check. This is basically, we use the current configuration to be able to show a diff before and after our switch. And now we're at this manual task that I'm going to work. And we see that here. This is what was previously on the device on the left side. On the right hand side, we see what we've changed. And I mean, of course, we changed a couple of last updated parts of that device, but what I want to focus on is we created the loopback interface 103 with our description 103 and with the data that we've captured from Netbox and our different systems. So I want to proceed with that change. And what happens after I proceed with that change? We see now here we've entered a child workflow called backup to Bitbucket. And so now we're going to search for the correct Bitbucket repo that is assigned to this device, and we're going to save the config into that Bitbucket repo. This is what's happening right now. And this has finished successfully as well. So now let's look into Bitbucket and let's look into the commits. And we see that 14 seconds ago, we have a commit to our repo. And here we see the change that we have added the loopback interface for 103. Okay, so, and this is how, let me go back to our workflow. This is how we went from a script where you manually have to enter your data like IP address, subnet mask, interface name, which is very error prone. We've taken that into an integrated approach where we integrate with different systems. We've seen Netbox and Bitbucket, but any system that provides APIs we can build with our adapter builder, we can create a connection to. And we've built logic around like our evaluation tasks, and we've created access control around it so that only the people you want to run this automation can actually see it and run it. And with that, I'll give it back to Chris.
Awesome, thanks, Alex. So, just to kind of bring it back to some of the discussion we had around multi-domain and different kind of techniques, whether, from an Itential perspective, we think there's going to be a lot of techniques to make changes to the network. So the type of demonstration today is not restricted to scripts, but we've expanded our core capabilities to onboard those scripts. So whether you're a DevOps capability like an Ansible module, or whether you're a controller or an orchestration platform, which has a very robust, validated type of way of integrating with the network, independent of those, we can take those scripts, we can put an API on top of them, we can onboard them into our end-to-end capabilities. Then we can add them to a self-serve capability, which is what we showed with the automation catalog, and also make sure that only the right people have the right access to make those types of changes to the network. So, as we move forward, we'll continue to have additional techniques, but that same stack of business logic coupled with self-serve capabilities will allow you to expand, the new techniques as they come, as we continue to see rapid evolution in the network automation domain. So something I spoke about before is, and you saw it with Alex getting through some of the product screens, is that we think over the last couple of years, there's been a big push to have our network engineers learn how to develop code. And while we'll always support, that movement, we do think it's the most important that we have the largest level of participation in network automation for these programs to be successful. And we do think it takes all three types of skill sets to participate. So our network engineers know how the network actually works. We have a lot of software development principles, and we also have a strong movement towards infrastructure as code and network as code as kind of our destination for network automation, which brings in a lot of those DevOps skill sets and capabilities. And from our mindset, we want to have the largest volume of participation in these programs. So from an Itential standpoint, whether it's our open source strategy and developer ecosystem, or whether it's our low code interface for network engineers, or whether it's our open source CI/CD pipeline and a lot of our DevOps concepts, we will continue to drive capabilities in all three of these directions. So customers kind of have the largest ecosystem and the largest participation level, because that's what we think it's going to take for some of this, for some of the progress towards this automation journey we're all on. So with that, this is the last summary slide. So hopefully this is the takeaways that you got from seeing both the demos and some of the discussion. But first and foremost, hit on this a few times, but we definitely want to leverage your existing automation efforts. So whatever state they are, you have certain groups that are moving forward with DevOps concepts, you have existing scripts, you have somebody launching a new program with some modern techniques. We want to leverage kind of an all of the above end-to-end concept. We definitely want to scale automation as you grow. So that's really starting historically with some maintenance activities, moving into config, service, and policy, and really leveraging your existing technology into that ecosystem, paired with RBAC capabilities and self-service concepts. And then the slide we just wrapped up with is really expanding your automation participation, thinking about, instead of the traditional, I write my requirements, I have a core set of 2 or 3 people that can participate in this automation. How do we expand that? And how do we have our automation and operations teams participate in the most meaningful way possible? And integrating with your environment. So we feel like we've driven the integration tax to nearly zero with writing code for the adapters. And we're really focused on some of the data integration challenges. But part of any automation technique for any domain is really integrating with a variety of systems around us that speak different languages and different data structures as we integrate the network with your IT stack. So those are the 4 key takeaways from today's webinar, and I appreciate everybody joining. So with that, I will get over to the questions. So let me pull up the questions. So the first one I have is, do any scripts come with the product? So the answer is no today. When it comes to things like you saw with the Ansible ecosystem in there, we do integrate with that module ecosystem. You'll see some stuff with us around some other DevOps concepts, and we do think creating libraries of ecosystems is critical. So we're working with some partners and customers about what is the right level of shareable intellectual property, so we can move the entire market forward. We do think there's a lot of reusable components that we need to move in that direction. So I think maybe more to come on that front. One other question is, I mostly use scripts, but recently adopted Ansible. What is the learning curve for Itential? So when we think about the onboarding of Itential from a skill set perspective, hopefully the takeaway is that we do want to leverage the skill sets and the capabilities that you have. So if you're already moving towards Ansible, you can leverage a lot of those skill sets. But I think the most important thing is that from an enablement perspective, I would point you to our developer.itential.io site. We do have a quote unquote free training environment there. We've posted all of our documentation. We've put, our desire is to enable the ecosystem as much as possible. So we're putting a tremendous amount of effort on that. So I would definitely encourage you to do that and provide us direct feedback on whether, our open docs, our open API specs, our enablement capabilities, Itential Academy, and our open source ecosystem is enough for you to onboard with what you're doing there. Here's one. How do I explain to my team that I want to add new automation solutions? We're in the middle of consolidating our tools. I think that kind of goes maybe with the first one. But when you're in a multi-domain environment and you have multiple techniques, I think a lot of people are going to bring those tools together. And I think not every situation is identical, but I do agree with the fact that you're going to want to have a core set of capabilities. But I think everybody needs to understand that it's also acceptable to have specific techniques for a domain. From an Itential standpoint, we want to bridge the end-to-end so that you can make those technique decisions in each domain. So we seem to keep talking about Ansible, but maybe you can onboard existing scripts and certain capabilities, maybe use DevOps concepts around cloud and data center, and maybe use some of your equipment provider controllers and orchestrators, maybe around some of the underlay or IP-centric networking. So I think that we do need to have a close set of tools, but at the same time, I think we need to be open to the fact that there's techniques for each domain, and from our perspective, really tying it together end to end, so you have the freedom of having those choices on a domain by domain basis is pretty important. I have a question: is using NetBox mandatory? Definitely not. I would point, because there's a couple questions in here around integrations and some of the open source platforms we chose to present in the end-to-end demonstration. The developer website for Itential has a list of all of our existing adapters, and we've worked very hard to be agnostic to those choices. So whether you're using an asset management system or whether you're using a ticketing system or whatever sort of IPAM type of system you're using, we preach a federation first approach, and we want you to use the technologies that you choose to. So what that means is we need to integrate with a whole lot of stuff, and we've actually built an adapter builder, which we went through on a separate call, which basically allows you to import a Swagger specification, an open API spec, or a Postman collection, and auto-generate those adapters. So we've tried to drive that integration cost to as close to zero as possible. So I would maybe point you at that adapter list. But we do have quite a few questions. I think we'll probably stop it there, and we'll follow up in email. So I appreciate everybody's participation and engagement. Top questions I think we've received in the past, so appreciate that. Hopefully you found the webinar useful, and for further questions, please contact us at the email on the screen or via any of those methods, and we look to see you online. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.